Chairman, thank you. Thanks to you and the ranking member for having this hearing. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. Collins, let me first thank you for joining me on a phone call with the University of Kansas Health System, in which your report on a vaccine was the highlight of the day, month, and year. So I'm pleased to hear that medical researchers and practitioners in Kansas heard what you said and found it to be a very pleasing, kind of an optimistic note. Let me ask something that is COVID-19 or is a virus so unique that there are not things that can be done to better prepare us for the next virus, the next pandemic, so that a vaccine development is developed, the development occurs in a shorter period of time? Or is it just starting, I don't know that scratch is the right word, but starting from scratch each time?
It's a great question, Senator. And yes, I enjoyed talking to the folks in Kansas, a wonderful bunch of scientists and physicians. Coronaviruses, of which this is one, have been around a long time. Some of them caused the common cold, and we still haven't cured that one, but it hasn't been such a high priority. And SARS and MERS were also coronaviruses. We learned something from them. If we'd not had already an effort to try to develop vaccines for SARS and MERS, we wouldn't have been able to jump on SARS-CoV-2, this guy, quite as quickly. So every time you do this, you get a little better at it. And plus, the overall technology for how we develop vaccines has been advancing. The lead vaccine now, in terms of its earliest out of the gate, which is the Moderna vaccine, and also the Pfizer one that was announced yesterday, same principle, utilizing RNA as the thing that you actually inject so that you ask the body to make the protein, which then becomes the antigen that your immune system reacts to. That's pretty new. We would not have done that 10 years ago. We wouldn't have known how. And we'll keep getting better at new ideas at that. I do hope, and maybe this is part of your question, that we learn from this experience that when we get through this, because we're going to get through this, we don't then go back into some complacency and say, well, that's it. We won't ever have another one like that again, because we all know we will. And what will it be? Will it be another coronavirus? Will it be that influenza epidemic that we've been worried we're overdue for, coming out of somewhere that's actually going to be very dangerous? We should never again step back into the point of complacency with these kinds of emerging infections. And I hope we will therefore, from what has been built to deal with COVID-19, sustain that.
Dr. Collins, thank you. I want to follow up on that, but I want to make sure I get a question to Dr. Redfield, and I'll try to be back to Dr. Collins. Dr. Redfield, thank you for the telephone conversation we had several months ago. I would highlight for you and others who might be listening that the issue of PPE, personal protection equipment, is back front and center. It seemed to me in my life it had diminished a bit, but in a conversation with community leaders, including hospital and public health officials, the concern is the supply is short once again as the numbers increase and the potential of a greater circumstance, a more challenging circumstance comes in this fall. So any suggestions that anyone who hears this statement of mine has on how I can get additional PPE to Kansas public health hospitals and employers, I would welcome that. But let me ask you, one of the things I take away from what's transpired is the importance of the public health departments. And I think generally we have, until I served on this committee, I didn't realize the significant role that CDC plays in support of our community and public health departments. What is it that needs to take place so that when the vaccine is developed, our public health departments are prepared to administer that vaccine in the distribution? How can CDC, how can this committee help make certain that occurs well?
Thank you very much, Senator. I think you've heard me say before, we've had decades of underinvestment in our public health departments across this nation, and this is the time now to correct that. And you all have really made great support. CDC has already awarded $12 billion with a B to the local, state, territorial, tribal health departments in the last 8 weeks or so to begin to give them the resources they need to begin to build up their capacity. You know, the human capacity usually takes longer than weeks to build up. We're obviously, as you know, I said CDC has over 650 people now embedded in the local health departments to help with that human capacity. And and we're going to continue to work with them. Recently, with the resources you did with the CARES Act, we were able to get a little over $10 billion out for each of the jurisdictions to put up plans to how to expand their testing, their contact tracing, their isolation, their public health infrastructure. So we're doing it on the run. I think you've heard me say before, when it comes to public health, this is something we as a nation should plan to be over-prepared, not under-prepared. And I do believe this is the moment in time when this nation can actually help put the public health infrastructure across this nation, not only that we need, but this nation deserves. As you mentioned, most of CDC's money actually get distributed to the local, state, territorial, tribal health departments, and some of these health departments were 70% of their overall funding. So we are the nation's funder, through you, of the public health infrastructure of this nation, and we need to augment that to where we're now over-prepared for the next pandemic.
Mr. Chairman, if you have a second round, I'll try to follow up with Dr. Collins.
Thank you, Senator Moran. Senator.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And I have been listening in my office to all of the hearing today, but I'm glad I was here in person to hear what Senator Alexander just said. And Lamar, while your tenure in the United States Senate is coming to an end, I hope your voice on this and many other things does not cease. Thank you. What you just said is important for us and for the American people to hear. And I appreciate how you've conducted yourself always, but what you had to say today was especially valuable. Dr. Collins, I promised I'd come back to ask you a question, and it deals with the consequences of the pandemic on research that was ongoing pre-pandemic. And so I'm worried, this subcommittee, this appropriations committee, NIH, our colleagues in Congress have highlighted the importance of NIH research and in many instances have put our money where our mouths are. And I'm worried that we have set the stage for a step backwards rather than a step forward as a result of the virus. And so my question is, that you can discount that if that's not true, but my impression is that research that should be ongoing today is not, that laboratories are not at capacity. Many are shut down. People have not been able to come to work. I don't know how prevalent that is in university research versus institutions in Maryland, but what is it that we need to know to make certain that we provide the resources, perhaps in a phase 4, that would quickly restart the capabilities of NIH to be on the path toward finding the cures to all the things we want to cure?
Senator, I really appreciate your asking the question. This is very much on my mind as I see the way in which, by necessity, for safety reasons, so much of our research enterprise, not just at NIH in our laboratories in Bethesda, but all over the country, since that's where most of NIH's dollars go, has been very much scaled back. Any research that involved something other than COVID-19 was pretty much put into a very slow pace because people needed to head home to protect against the further outbreaks. And people were still able to do science, and many of them have worked incredibly hard doing what they can do. But if you need a lab bench and you need some equipment and some supplies, you can't do that in your dining room. So it is fair to say we have lost a lot of time with research that required that kind of action, whether it's in cancer research or has something to do with gene therapy or a diabetes project like in my lab, because all of my people had to go home too. This has been a major negative consequence, among many others, of COVID-19. We do not want to see that have a lasting impact. I will tell you the universities, who are our major grantees, are hurting bad right now because of the way in which this has hit them financially. They've both had the difficulty of not being able to conduct research that they thought they were doing, but of course many of them have medical centers that have been hemorrhaging money because of the inability to do elective surgeries and other procedures that would normally allow them to balance the books. They're in deep trouble. We have estimated, just on the basis of the research that's been lost, something in the neighborhood of $10 billion of federal funds that may be necessary to recoup if we're going to bring these institutions back up to where they need to be. On top of that, I think there's a wide variety of areas that NIH... My watch is talking to me, thinking I'm talking too long. A wide variety of areas that NIH really would like to also put more efforts into to compensate for this in terms of our efforts in COVID-19. So yes, we have been very interested in hearing what might be possible in terms of that compensation, and I know the institutions who are our grantees are particularly so, probably including in Kansas. I would be surprised if you've not heard from the leaders there about the situation they're in.
Doctor, thank you. I don't know how many times I've asked you, when are we going to be able to delay the onset? When is the research going to be sufficient to delay the onset of Alzheimer's? When are we going to be able to rid ourselves of diabetes? And you have, in your ways, have tried to tell us the time frame on which things seem to be on. And I worry that if we ask the question today, it would have to be a time frame that is much shorter. And while the pandemic is certainly severe and serious, a crisis in many ways, the cure for cancer, the ridding ourselves of diabetes and Alzheimer's is so significant as well that we cannot now allow this circumstance to keep us from being on the path necessary to do the things that we've set out.
And Senator, I want to assure you, NIH is doing everything within our power to allow flexibilities amongst our grantees in terms of ways that they can keep things going. Young investigators can have an extension on the timetable for their career next step and all of that. But it is still a heartbreaking situation to see the consequences.
Since I used most of my time to brag on Senator Alexander, I'm going to try to get another question in, and that is, we see and hear Dr. Fauci regularly. And tell me about the other institutes at NIH. What else? I didn't mean to discount him. My actual question is, what are the other institutes have to do with the pandemic? It wouldn't just be infectious diseases that are trying to help us solve this problem. I assume NIH across the board is engaged fully.
Absolutely. I convened all of the institute directors back in March and said, what could we do collectively that just one institute can't do, although certainly Tony Fauci's institute is in the lead. And every single one of our 27 institutes and centers has a significant role they would like to play, some of which they don't have resources for, but hope that perhaps it might be possible to obtain them. Such things as the Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute, since this is a lung disease, and they're actually running a trial right now of anticoagulants because that is the place, heart, lung, and blood, where they have the greatest expertise to be able to see if that can help people who are the most ill patients on ventilators and ICUs. The Genomics Institute is trying to figure out what's the difference between individuals that predicts who's going to get really sick after an exposure and who kind of shrugs it off. There's probably some big story to be learned there that could be useful, even in terms of figuring out who ought to be the highest priority to get a vaccine. I mentioned already child health and the importance of worrying about kids, but also about pregnant women. Certainly the health disparities issues that you've heard about are absolutely pressing, and we have expertise in that space as well. So it is all hands on deck with people designing programs, trying to figure out if there are ways that they can reallocate dollars in the very rapid turnaround, and hoping there's a way that they can expand that because of the great needs. So thanks for the question. It is very important and very much on everybody's minds at NIH.
I've utilized more than my goodwill, so I can't ask anybody else any other questions, but Dr. Disbrow and Dr. Redfield, I have issues and things I'd like to discuss with you, and I look forward to doing that when it becomes possible.